So today what I want to do is to show you how to draft a cover for your bike seat. Just like this one. I had to take my bike with the entire pipe because all the screws are rusting and I cannot really remove it. So it's hard for me to show you the front now without having the other camera, but I hope you can see exactly what we're going to do today. So the reason why I wanted to create my bike seat cover is just look at the state of my seat. Because my bike sits outside, it's all cracking and you can see that foam. And every time I want to ride a bike, this foam gets really wet. So you can imagine my frustration when I want to ride a bike and then I end up with a wet patch on my bum because this foam is all wet and it really never dries out anymore since my bike is outside. So I thought, since some of you wanted to know exactly how I created a cover which is nicely shaped to the bike seat that I have, I thought I'm going to show you how to do your own custom template. So that's exactly what I'm going to do today. So this is what it looks like. It looks like the hair cap or whatever you call them in a way. I use an elastic, but you could use like a string with like a or a cord with like a stopper if you want to like cinch it in as well. That's another option, but I found elastic works really good on this. Plus it's just a bike seat cover, it's nothing fancy. So that's what I've done. So if you want to follow me along, simply grab paper, pencil, ruler. You'll need tape measure as well. And if you've got your bike seat on hand, go to your garage or shed or whatever, just, grab it and you can actually create the custom cover with me in real time. But if you don't, you can just watch me doing it and then I will leave the replay on my YouTube channel so you can watch it anytime you want to actually create your custom cover. So I'm going to start because something else might go wrong today. So what you want to do is to grab your seat. If you can, remove it from that pole, do that. Unfortunately, I cannot because it's all rusting and I get probably dirty fingers. So just ignore that because this is all it's my bike, it's in a real state. So anyway, what you want to do is to grab your seat and place it on the paper just like that. Make sure you have large enough paper so you can trace it around. So I stuck 2 pages, just the printing pages together, so I have enough room. And I'm going to use a marker, Sharpie, so you can see it on camera. Obviously, if you are doing it at home, you probably want to use like a pencil or something that you can remove and you don't have very thick lines, because then the pattern is not really precise. But because this is just a quick demonstration, I'm just going to use Sharpie. So what I like to do is to basically hold my bike seat. I'm going to stand up so I can actually do that, and simply draw around. So what I like to do is to keep my pen or pencil at an angle of my bike seat. So you can either keep it straight or like a little bit at an angle if you want more fitted look. If you keep it straight like this at 90 degree to the table, you'll have a little bit this portion on the top that gives you shaping will be a little bit more loose, and this is what I've done on this one. But I've created very first one which I've drew my shaping at an angle slightly, so it meant that the seam were closer to the actual shaping of my seat when I look at it from the top. But just so you know exactly why yours may be a little bit looser or more tighter. That's the reason why. It depends on how you draw your lines. So what I like to do is to hold it and then simply take my pen and drag it along the edge around all sides, and I'll try to keep it at the same angle. So it doesn't matter if it's 90-degree or at a slight angle like this. All you want to do is to make sure you keep the same angle around all sides. And that is basically the outline. So let's just sit down again. So what you want to do now is like, don't worry if your pattern is a little bit wonky, if your lines are a little bit wonky, or like here I have a little bit like a weird angle, or maybe they don't even look that symmetrical, because it is quite difficult to draw it around an object, especially if, you know, it has like a curved edges in certain points. So what you want to do now is to pick one half and basically stick to that. We'll create symmetrical pattern piece based on your favorite side, let's say. So what I do, let's say I had like a weird lines on this side, I would pick this side because it's pretty smooth. I'm pretty happy with, you know, how I traced my pattern, my seat. I could make it, you know, a little bit smoother if I had to in certain places. So what you want to do now is to draw a line in the center. If you want to eyeball it, you can do that. Otherwise, to just kind of roughly find a center, take your tape measure, place it on top. It doesn't really matter in which place, where. You just want to make sure you are along the same level. And then what I like to do is to keep it like this and fold it in half. And I bring the end of my tape, and then I'll kind of flatten my measuring tape, and then I draw a little line. So that would be my midpoints. I'll do one more on the other end, so then I can connect them. Again, I'm just going to flatten that and draw a line. Here you go. So now that I have kind of my 2 points, I can draw a line in the center. So I'll just quickly do that. So that would be my center. So I am not looking at all on this part, since what we want to do is to focus on the part that you are happy with it. So what you want to do next is to measure the length of that seam, because we'll need that measurement to create our gusset. So this part here is a gusset. So let me just put that back on my seat so you can exactly see what I'm talking about. So here is that seam that's shaping the pattern that we just created, the draft, and here around is the gusset where the elastic is inserted. So you don't have to worry about, you know, the whole bike seat to fall off your bike while you're riding it. So what you want to do now is to measure from this point to this point, this curved edge, because that will give us the length of the seam, and also that will give us the exact length of that gusset. The gusset is just a rectangle that wraps around this entire pattern piece to create our bike seat cover. So what I like to do is to take my tape measure again and simply walk the seam. So what does walk the seam means? You basically are walking the seam, the line. That line is our stitching line. So we haven't added seam allowance just yet. We'll add seam allowance later. So don't worry about adding seam allowance or anything like this. At the moment, this is your stitching line. So that is the seam that you can see on my finished cover. And to find the length of that seam, we need to walk the seam, and the easiest way to do it is to hold your tape measure like this, so at 90 degrees towards the to the table. Don't lay it flat, since our seam is curved. If it's just a straight edge, you can lay it flat, but anytime you have to measure the length of the seam of the line, it's going to be very difficult to keep it like this and measure it. You rarely get precise measurement. So the easiest way to do it is to take your tape measure, place one end at the beginning of the line, and then simply walk the seam. So you will want to be as precise as you can. You'll have to take your time to do it. I'm just going to do it quickly, so I don't waste your time, since your bike seat is probably different than mine, so the measurements that I'll have probably don't matter to you at this point. So let's say mine is 40 centimeters. So the length of this line is 40 centimeters. I'm just going to write this so I don't forget it. So this is going to be my gusset. All right. And since this is half of our pattern, we'll need to cut it twice. Like, either you're going to cut it twice and add seam allowance, or you're going to have to cut it twice as long. So instead of 40, it will be 80, because the entire seam is, in that case, in my example, 80 centimeters. So once you have that, what you want to do next is to add seam allowance. So now I'm just going to move my tape measure aside, and I like to use my straight quilting ruler to add seam allowance around curves. So since we are connecting two parts, two different halves, you want to make sure that this point here and this point here is at 90-degree angle in comparison to the middle line, to the center line. So what I like to do is to just draw myself a little 90-degree line, just so I know how to add my seam allowance, and just so it doesn't end up being like a weird shaping. You either will have like a weird V shape, whichever direction your seam is pointing. So you want to make sure those two pieces are straight. So now that I have that, I can add my seam allowance. So I like to add 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm just going to quickly do that. And as you can see, I use my straight ruler, my quilting ruler, to draw very short lines. So what I do is I keep the stitching line at 1 centimeter mark, and then I draw short lines, and I rotate my ruler depending on the shape of my line. And I want to make sure the line that I draw is parallel to my stitching line. And that is how easy it is to actually draw your seam allowance around curves, straight lines, any shaping really. So let me just pivot my paper so I can continue. Let me just do that really quickly. The reason why I like to do it this way is because now I'm going to fold that paper in half, and I can create my full pattern piece. So if you want, you can cut it along that center line and create only half of your pattern. This will have to be on fold, obviously, to create the entire piece. But since I already glued those two pieces together, I'm going to fold my paper in half along that line. And then what you can do is to simply cut it out. So I'm not going to do that because I forgot to prep my scissors. But that's how you would create identical pattern piece on the other side. So you can easily remove this if this is wonky, erase it if you use pencil, or just ignore it, and however you cut it, you'll have nice symmetrical pattern. So that would be our pattern number 1. So what you want to do in this situation is to add a label so you know exactly what it is. So I would write bike seat cover, and we need to cut it 1 time from external fabric or from any fabric. Since I wanted to make sure mine is waterproof or water resistant, I'm going to write waterproof fabric, because I want to make sure that every time I make it, I remember, oh, you need a waterproof fabric. I didn't line my cover because it's not a bag, it's not a purse, nobody's looking inside, not even myself. So to be honest, I didn't really feel like lining the whole thing up and making it look really pretty inside. But if you do want to make sure all your seam allowances are hidden, cut it twice. You can even cut it extra padding or something like that to make your seat more soft. That's an option, but I'm not going to include that in my sewing tutorial in my sewing tutorial later on. I'm going to show you how to do this cover just with the 2 pieces of fabric, leaving raw edges on the inside. Since I'm using waterproof fabric on mine, that fabric doesn't fray. But if it did fray, if I wanted only make a pretty cover on my bike seat and not necessarily waterproof, I would then either overlock or zigzag those seams just to make sure the fabric wouldn't fray, you know, while I'm using it. But like I mentioned, since I'm using waterproof fabric, we know majority of times this fabric doesn't fray, so I don't have to worry about it. So yeah, so that is now our first pattern piece. So next we're going to create our gusset, and I mentioned earlier, I'm going to take another piece of paper. I mentioned earlier that it is just a simple rectangle. So what you want to do, I'm going to draw a line just to start, and obviously if you are making your pattern, it would have to be 40, like it would be whatever the seam allowance, the seam length is. So your rectangle would have to be as long as the length of your seam. So in my situation, in this example, it's 40 centimeters, but I don't really feel like drawing 40 centimeter long rectangle. So I'm just going to make a mini version of it, and I will show you how I mark it. I do it for my paid patterns as well. So I'll show exactly what I do in a situation when I don't really feel like creating a very long rectangle, but I still want to have the exact measurements. So start by drawing a long line, the length of your seam. Then what you want to do is to take your bike seat, and I'm going to take this off again because we need to figure out at this point how long or how high is that gusset. If I show you my bike seat from the side, you probably will see that this part is much wider than the front. So instead of just measuring this front here, and let's say this is 5 centimeters, I would end up with a gusset that would go around here. So it wouldn't be able to cover the entire curvature of my bike seat on the back. So since I want to make sure I am able to, you know, cover it and the elastic goes underneath, I need to make sure this part is covered and it's long enough. So what I like to do in this situation is take my ruler, lay my bike seat flat like this, take my straight ruler and simply, wait, this way, and simply have a look at where the edge of my bike hits. So that's about 8 centimeters for me. So the height of my bike seat at the highest point is about 8 centimeters. Now, depending how you drew your initial draft, initial pattern piece, if like me you were drawing at a 90-degree angle, then you can take that measurement now. If you drew your pattern at a slight angle like this, you'll have to accommodate for the curvature. So your gusset might be even longer. So since this is not a project that needs to be really, really precise, because it's just a cover, unless you really want to be precise and really snug, then you would have to take your time and do some extra measurements. But I am not really, too worried about it. If I put this back on, you'll see it fits really nicely around this top edge. So when I use my bike, I don't have to, even if I wiggle on with my bum while I cycle, I don't have to worry about the bike seat slipping off by accident, because I have enough room, there is enough coverage to hold everything in place. But saying that, it does create a little wrinkles on the side, because I'm cinching, my bike seat quite tightly. So if you want to kind of eliminate those wrinkles, you would have to either make your elastic looser, so it would sit more like this, or make the initial draft narrower. Like you would have to take away from those parts where you don't want the elastic to go over that much, because remember, along this portion the gusset is 8 centimeters, but along this portion the gusset would technically maybe be 4-5 centimeters. So there is 2-3, maybe even 4 centimeters difference between those two pieces. And instead of creating the gusset to be shaping like in a weird shape, I wanted to make this as easy as possible for me to sew. So it's easier for me to sew a straight line of the rectangle, because on one side we're going to sew the elastic, and on the other side of that rectangle we're going to sew that straight line around the entire panel. So you could play with it if you wanted to make very, very nicely fitting cover, but I'm not really fast, to be honest. It's supposed to be a fun project that you can do in no time, and you don't really have to faff around. So once you know the largest point on your bike, now we can start drawing our rectangle. So since my bike is 8 centimeters tall on that deepest portion, I guess, I want to make sure that the fabric wraps around that edge. So I'm going to add another 1.5 centimeter to that measurement. So instead of drawing a rectangle that is 8 centimeters, I'm going to draw a rectangle that is 9.5. So let me just quickly do that. If you've got any questions or need clarification, just let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to answer any of your questions, or if you've got suggestions for future videos, or just let me know what you think about projects like that. So I can see Gloria is saying that it's a great project, and I absolutely agree. So now that we have our gusset, remember, the gusset needs to be the same length as the length of your seam. So in my example, it would be 40 centimeters. But I drew a rectangle that is about less than 27 centimeters. So it's not long enough. I would have to stick another paper here and then draw it longer. So what I like to do in this situation is two things. If you drew a rectangle that is 40 centimeters long, or the length of your seam, what you want to do is to add a cut on fold marking, because remember, the 40 centimeters, this 40 centimeters is only half of my main panel. But since I created slightly shorter rectangle, I'm going to ignore this, and instead what I like to do is to draw a couple of wiggly lines, draw some arrows, and I always write here extend to, and then I write the exact measurement. So I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do the measurement just yet because we need to add seam allowance first. So if you've added your cut on fold marking, you don't have to add seam allowance along this edge, because this edge will be cut on fold. So imagine, you know, this is fabric, this is the fold edge. You would, you know, line up this line along the edge of your fabric and cut it like this. So your gusset would be twice as long. But if, like me, you are not cutting it on fold, then we need to add seam allowance. So I like to add the same seam allowance everywhere. So I'll add 1 centimeter seam allowance, since I've added the same seam allowance on my main panel. I'll add 1 centimeter seam allowance along the top. Maybe I'll turn it this way because I'll need extra space on this side. So imagine this is the top. Since this is rectangle, it doesn't really matter at this point. And we're going to add 1 centimeter seam allowance along the other side. So imagine you have a very, very long piece of fabric. You'll have to sew two ends of this rectangle together. So those are basically those ends. And I have my seam along the back center. So I'm not sure if you can see that on the camera, but I have a seam here. Otherwise, my gusset is one long rectangle. So now this edge here is the bottom edge where we're going to sew our gusset. Let me just check, Michelle. I can do this to make some new mop heads for my floor steam cleaner with elastic. I was wondering how I would draft it. I think this will be similar. Yeah, most probably. I'm not sure. Do you mean like the flat floor steam cleaners? I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about, but if you send me a picture or something, I'm sure I can point you in the right direction, Michelle. Anyway, this portion here now is where we're going to sew our elastic, or you're going to feed your drawstrings, or whatever you want to do to cinch that gusset in, to make sure it doesn't, you know, fall from your bike seat. So I like to use just a normal elastic, not too thick. I think this one is like, I don't know, 5-7 millimeters wide, something like that. So depending on how you want to finish off your seam, you need to pay attention to how much seam allowance you're going to add. So for instance, I turned my seam twice, my edge twice. So I've folded my fabric once, and then I folded it second time. So if you look inside, I don't have the raw edge here. Here is the folded edge. I could technically fold it only once and leave it raw edge. I don't I don't actually know why I didn't do it. I think it's purely because I always do that. I always do double fold, but it does create more stronger seams, so I don't have to worry about this fabric fraying since we are stitching close to the edge. So maybe that's, you know, why I've done it the way I've done it. But yeah, I think it's just pure because I always do double fold. So since I'm going to do double fold again, I need to take account the size of my elastic or drawstring, cord, whatever you want to do. And then you want to add extra because you want to make sure you can fit it through. So what I found before is that I like to use this bodkin to fit it, and it has to be certain my tunnel, the tunnel where I'm going to fit my elastic, needs to be center size to ensure that I can actually fit that tool in. So I found if I have it about 1.5 centimeter, that is more than enough space since we are stitching as well, which makes the actual tunnel a little bit smaller, narrower. What I like to do is to add 3 centimeters, which is double my seam allowance. So imagine if you want your tunnel to be 1.5 centimeter, then you double that because we are folding it twice. So I'll just take my ruler, measure 3 centimeters, and then draw parallel line. Just like that. Here you go. So now we have our pattern finished. So what we have to do is to add our label. So again, I would just write bike seat cover, and then that would be my gusset. And we need to cut it 1 time. If you added the cut on fold, you can write cut 1 on fold. But since I didn't, I'm just going to write cut 1 from waterproof fabric. And then, like I mentioned, I like to make sure that I cut this rectangle to the exact measurement. So, since my gusset supposed to be 40 centimeters, and that's only half, I need to double it. So that's 80 centimeters. And then we've added 1 centimeter seam allowance on both sides. So 1 centimeter and 1 centimeter. So instead of cutting 80 centimeter long rectangle, I need to cut my gusset 82 centimeters. You can write, you know, including seam allowance. I already see that I've added my seam allowance. If I cut my pattern piece now, on this particular pattern, I would already know that I've added my seam allowance, and I can straight away see how much seam allowance I've added. So I don't really have to add any more annotations to it. But if you didn't add, or maybe you erased it by accident, or for whatever reason, you can also add including seam allowance. And that's basically it. That would be your 2 pattern pieces that you would need. Obviously you need to cut them out and then cut them from your fabric. And in the next tutorial, in the next video, I'll show you how to assemble it. It is very easy, very quick to assemble. It's not, I wouldn't say it's the easiest, because if you aren't familiar with sewing curved seams, it can be a little bit tricky, but because this is such a easy project to make, we don't have to worry about the lining, about, you know, being it perfect. I think this is perfect opportunity to actually practice sewing, you know, curved seams and straight seams together. I found that was really, you know, especially on more like the sturdy fabrics, when you don't have the flexibility and it doesn't stretch, and sometimes, you know, you can struggle. Projects like this one, they are very good opportunity to practice and actually, you know, make something that you can use at the end. So yeah, so that's basically all I wanted to show you today. Michelle, they are triangle shape. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, you would trace around and then add how much coverage. I don't know if they are like very high. I don't know how they exactly look like, but yeah, I think that it would be very similar process to draft it. So yeah, so that's basically it from me. I hope you enjoyed this little demonstration. And in the next lesson, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to sew your own bike seat cover. I have few other ideas in the future. I was hoping I could show my face finally. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gloria, for letting me know. I hope you found it useful. Let me know if you're going to give it a go. But yeah, I really like those classes. I was really hoping to show my face, and I played with the software to change the cameras and be more, you know, fun for you guys. But obviously the universe is, you know, against me today. So this is again what you had to look at, all my hands. So yeah, anyway, I hope to see you in the next video. Leave me some comments, some suggestions for the future, if you want to see something else, if you want to learn something specific. I always love to hear from you. And yeah, that's all from me, so I'll let you go. I'm going to go to cook some dinner now for my partner because he's coming home soon. So I need to get cracking. So thank you very much for joining me live. It was lovely, and sorry about the mishap at the beginning. All right, guys. See you next time. Stay crafty, friends. Bye.